some volunteer programs like Operation Terrapin Rescue, which is a project where we have a road that's very close to the coast. It borders the Delaware Bay, and there's a lot of erosion occurring there due to sea level rise. And there's traffic that goes through there, and there's been some issues. There's been some rocks placed along the road, which has made moving across the road for gravid terrapins more difficult. So we have volunteers that go out there and kind of help the terrapins, move them out of the road so they don't get hit by cars, and then help them navigate around the rocks going to and from the bay. So those are probably the majority of the projects that I'm working on.
Now, this is an interesting one because I know that Florida is dealing with the Terrapin thing right now. I'm keeping up with that, but because usually you don't necessarily want somebody messing with the animals as they're trying to get across the road, at least, or maybe brush them, because you don't really know if they're going to want to, if they're just basking or if they're, so they're not really wanting to go to that side or that side. So it's, I don't know if I should be telling the audience to help the Terrapins or contact you guys first. But if you have the volunteer, how does that work? Like, are you training them? Because your program talked about them actually even getting trapped into the rocks, not just trapped because of the rocks, but in the rocks themselves.
Yeah. So, well, for the road issue, I would say if a turtle's on the road, you should move it off. Chances are it's going to get hit by a car. Yeah. So, the disturbance to the turtle is minimal compared to the impact from a vehicle. Generally, I move turtles in the direction that they're headed across the road. Sometimes that can be difficult, especially if they're kind of going up the road rather than across it. But you use your best judgment in some of those situations as to which direction.
How many of those tunnels? Because you guys, I saw the picture of the tunnel that goes underneath. So in order to prevent further degradation of the road from wave action, there's been some fairly large boulders that have been stacked up, very large riprap essentially along the margin of the road. And as terrapins are trying to get from the water to the road, they have to pass by this rock barrier. Because the rocks are so big, there's a lot of holes and gaps that kind of lead down to underneath the rock pile. But we're also dealing with tides in this area. So the terrapin's trying to get through in high tide. It might be able to make it, a little bit across, but then as that tide recedes, it falls deeper and deeper within that pile of rocks. And then when the water rises again, it can become trapped and not find a hole or have an appropriate size hole to get back to the surface. So there is potential for drowning. So in this situation, we ask volunteers to check for terrapins in the rocks and pull them out if they find them in there. They actually the terrapins, when they're in there, they're swimming around and scratching, trying to crawl up the rocks, so that you can actually hear them more than you can see them. So it is pretty easy to get them out and locate them and get them out when that situation occurs. But we did place some concrete tunnels, which are essentially culverts, that the Department of Transportation would use to put under a road for a stream passage. We did pass some of those through the rock pile in order to allow, turtles to have a way to get through. But turtles don't naturally go to tunnel openings and stuff like that. So
they have a little trouble locating them, and they prefer to try to get through the rocks. But the tunnels are there as a means of assistance.
Okay. Yeah, I'm wondering. There's a couple things. So if somebody's driving along or just walking along and they see the turtle on the road, would you suggest at least putting it close to the opening, those tunnel openings that?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine, and some of our volunteers do that.
Now, also, if they hear that scratching, should they call you guys to have a volunteer come out, or should they help the turtle themselves? Like, that's...
No, I'd say just go right ahead and see if you see a turtle in there and pull it out. If you were to encounter that situation. But we do have, so the terrapins tend to make their breeding movement at around high tide. So we have essentially a volunteer out there every day in the breeding season in a 3-hour window associated with high tide. And so that runs from the end of May through about the 3rd week of July.
You talked on the deal, I thought it said 5 miles, right, of road?
I believe it's 2 miles.
2 miles?
2 miles.
That's still a lot of road for one person.
It is, yeah. Okay. And now there are hot spots where we've noticed the terrapins prefer to try to cross. And then there's large stretches where we don't really find any terrapins at all.
Yeah. And terrapins are pretty important to keep alive. I guess their numbers are going down or something in Florida. Something's happening in Florida with them. So there's a big fuss over that right now. So they are important. So
yeah, I mean they're an important species to the salt marsh community. Their primary prey item are essentially snails. And those snails feed on the spartina, the salt marsh grass. So they help keep that snail population in check, so you don't have an overgrazing of spartina. If you were to lose too much spartina, that's going to lead to erosion and loss of coastline. So they are an important species to the ecosystem.
I will link the laws and the volunteer in the description so that anybody that actually wants to volunteer to help the terrapins out can. And
yeah, that'd be great. People can just contact me via my email. We get you set up on how to volunteer.
Yeah, that's wonderful.